Patton leaned over the map table and jabbed his gloved finger into a narrow seam between two pencil lines. "We close it here," he told the officers around him. 2 days, maybe less." A staff major hesitated, eyes flicking from Patton's finger to the red grease pencil marks creeping toward Falaise. "And if we don't?" Patton didn't look up. "Then they get away." The room smelled of dust, sweat, and cigarettes. A farmhouse turned into a command post. Radios, field phones, men trying to keep up with a front that was moving too fast to feel real. Outside, engines coughed in the dark. Inside, map lights made every road look like an artery. Patton wasn't thinking about tomorrow's headlines. He was thinking about a door that was closing right now. A reconnaissance captain stepped forward, mud on his boots, eyes hollow from watching men die. "Sir, the corridor is jammed. Trucks, horse carts, tanks. They're abandoning vehicles. It's chaos." Patton scanned the report and tossed it onto the table. "They're bleeding," he said. "They know it's over. They're running." He turned to the radio operator. "Get me Bradley." The operator swallowed. "General Bradley's line is busy, sir." Patton's jaw tightened. Artillery thumped in the distance. Rifle fire cracked. Engines rumbled. Every sound was time leaving the room. He looked back at the map. The Falaise Gap wasn't a city. It wasn't even a place people would remember. It was a mouth. And the German army was trying to crawl out of it. Patton had lived by one rule: speed saves lives. Hesitation kills them. And now he could see the finish line. A sergeant rushed in with a message slip. Patton watched his aide read it, watched the color drain from his face. "It's from Corps," the aide said. "They want your position and your intent." Patton snatched the paper. He could feel it, like a runner hearing a starting gun and realizing the lane beside him is being blocked. The Germans were funneling toward one exit. The Allies were inches from slamming the door. Patton spoke low. "If we move now, we end this." He looked at the radio, waiting. The line stayed silent. 200 miles away, Omar Bradley stood in a different room, cleaner, quieter, full of men who spoke in careful voices. A phone rang on a desk buried in reports. "Patton is trying to get through," an aide said. Bradley didn't answer. He stared at his own map. The same roads, the same gap. Then exhaled, like a man about to make a decision he would be blamed for the rest of his life. Bradley's headquarters did not feel like Patton's. No raised voices, no slammed fists. Just quiet conversations held just out of earshot. The war here was measured in logistics and alliances, not engine noise. Bradley stood with his hands behind his back while his staff walked him through the map. Patton's arrows cut into France like knives, long, sharp thrusts. Impressive, dangerous. An officer tapped the Falaise corridor. "If Third Army pushes north," he said, "they link with the Canadians and close it." Bradley nodded, but he didn't smile. In his mind, he didn't see German units trapped. He saw egos colliding. Montgomery pressing from the north, Canadians bleeding to hold ground, Patton storming in from the south. If Patton sealed the pocket, he didn't just win a battle. He became the hero of the war. And heroes are hard to control. Bradley had spent months managing something fragile, not just armies, the coalition. Eisenhower needed unity. Montgomery demanded credit. Patton collected enemies without trying. A colonel cleared his throat. "Sir, Montgomery's liaison is asking about boundaries. They're concerned about Third Army entering their sector." There it was. Not German resistance, British resentment. Bradley walked to the window. Jeeps and trucks moved through the dust like insects. A runner hurried past with message slips. The war was a machine. Machines break when too many hands fight over the controls. A phone rang. Bradley turned. "Put it through." Patton's voice hit the room like artillery. "Omar, they're in a funnel. I can close it in 48 hours. I need clearance now." Bradley kept his voice steady. "George, you're moving too fast for the North to keep pace." Patton didn't slow. "The North is not the point. The Germans are the point. If we hesitate, we fight them again." Bradley stared at the map. Packed enemy columns, burning roads. Then another image. Patton ends the war in France. He hated that it mattered, but it did. A major leaned in. "Sir, Eisenhower wants the lines held. Overextension, fuel, confusion." Bradley covered the receiver. Overextension, fuel, confusion. All reasonable, all perfect ways to say something else. We're losing control of Patton. He lifted the phone. "George, hold for now. I'm coordinating closure from the North." Patton answered quietly. "You're not coordinating it. You're delaying it." Bradley didn't respond. He stared at the map until the lines blurred. Then he spoke. "Hold your position. That's the order." The line went dead. Bradley held the receiver for a moment, like it was heavier than it should be. Then he set it down, and the room kept breathing. At Patton's command post, the handset lowered slowly. No one spoke. Then Patton's mouth tightened into something like a smile. "Write this down," he said. "We're going to be blamed for what they just allowed." The next morning, the corridor was still open. East of Chambois, a German truck burned in a ditch, canvas curling into black ribbons. Men in field gray ran beside horse carts, shoving, shouting, slipping in mud. A half-track lay sideways across the road. Behind it, a column stacked up like panic you could touch. Allied artillery thumped beyond the trees. Each blast made the earth jump. Each second made escape easier. A young German lieutenant climbed onto a hood. "Move!" His voice cracked. No one listened. They were no longer soldiers. They were men running for their lives. 15 miles away, Patton stood in his command post, helmet off, sleeves rolled, sweat drying on his arms. A liaison spread fresh reports. More traffic. More surrendering units. More proof the pocket was begging to be closed. Patton pointed to the map. "We take that ridge by noon," he said. "Then we cut the road." The chief of staff hesitated. "Sir, Bradley's order still stands." Patton stared at him. Then he reached for the phone. When Bradley answered, Patton didn't waste a word. "The corridor is packed," he said. "You can smell it in the reports. Give me permission to close it." Bradley answered like a man crossing thin ice. "George, the Canadians are pushing from the north. If you lunge into their lanes, we risk blue on blue." Patton tightened his grip. "Chaos? The chaos is letting the enemy escape while we politely coordinate." Bradley snapped back. "This is not your war alone." Patton leaned over the map. "Then stop running it like a committee." In Bradley's headquarters, no one pretended anymore. Every face angled toward the phone. Bradley felt their eyes, Eisenhower's shadow. And something else. The fear of letting Patton become unstoppable. A British liaison handed him a note. Bradley read it. "Boundaries, credit, Montgomery's sector."
He hated that it mattered. He knew that it did. Bradley spoke quietly. "George, you will not advance north of your line. You will hold. The closure comes from the north." Patton went silent, not the silence of acceptance, the silence of a man watching a door stay open while footsteps run through it. "Omar, you're going to let them walk out?" Bradley didn't answer. "This is the order." At Patton's end, only breathing, then, "Understood." The line went dead. Outside the farmhouse, tanks idled. Crews waited. A lieutenant looked at Patton, angry and helpless. Patton stepped into the dust, stared north, where the gap still breathed, and said, "We're watching history run away." And in the corridor, German boots kept moving.
By afternoon, the gap began to narrow. Not like a trap snapping shut, but like a tired hand closing a door after the intruder has already slipped through. On a ridge above the escape routes, American artillery roared. Barrels glowed, shells walked along the road. Vehicles tore apart in fire and metal. Gun crews moved like factory machines. Load, slam, fire, recoil, again. Smoke layered the sky. The air tasted metallic. Through binoculars, a forward observer watched German columns shatter, scatter into fields, then reform farther down the road. It looked like destruction. It wasn't enough. In a ruined orchard, German soldiers crawled beneath hedgerows. Shells burst above them. A sergeant grabbed a boy by the collar and shoved him forward. They weren't thinking about victory. They were thinking about surviving the next 60 seconds. Miles behind the front, Patton sat with his diary open. A pencil hovered over the page. He had been loud his whole life. Now his anger poured out in quiet lines. A staff officer entered. "Sir, tens of thousands are still moving east. Some slipping out at night." Patton didn't look up. "How many?" "Maybe 100,000, sir." The pencil froze. Patton stared at the paper, like the number itself had weight. In Bradley's headquarters, there was cautious relief, coordination, boundaries, words that avoided one truth: escape. Bradley told himself he had prevented chaos, that Patton's speed would have created disaster. Then a report arrived. German units reforming behind the Seine. A thin crack opened in Bradley's certainty. What if Patton was right? In the weeks that followed, the survivors didn't disappear. They became roadblocks, rear guards, the bones of resistance in Belgium and the Ardennes. Every firefight after that paid interest on the decision made at Falaise. Patton felt it like a wound. Bradley felt it like a shadow. The war kept going, not because the Allies were weak, but because one door had been left open just long enough. In another command post, Eisenhower held a message. One report said, "Nearly closed." Another said, "Enemy escaping in significant numbers." He studied the map. "How many did we miss?" No one answered. That night, Patton stood outside under blackout. His tanks sat silent. A crewman waited on the track for orders that never came. Patton stared north. Not angry. Impotent. At Bradley's table, a British liaison mentioned Montgomery's concerns. Bradley nodded and wondered if he had traded German destruction for Allied harmony. By morning, the corridor was quiet, not because it was sealed, but because so many had already escaped. The war did not end at Falaise. It simply moved. The men who slipped through that corridor didn't disappear. They became roadblocks in Belgium, the backbone of the Siegfried Line. The soldiers who froze in the Ardennes when the last German gamble exploded into the Battle of the Bulge. Every one of those battles carried a shadow that led back to one open road in August 1944. In Paris, people celebrated liberation without knowing how close the war had come to ending in their fields. In Washington, planners drew new timetables, never realizing some of those extra weeks had already been decided. And Patton kept thinking about a map that no longer existed. He wrote about it, not in speeches, but in the private language of a man who knew something had slipped away. To him, Falaise was where the war should have ended. The Germans should have been trapped, starved, destroyed. Every Allied casualty after that felt like a debt that never had to exist. Bradley told a different story. In his memoirs, he spoke of coordination, of restraint, of keeping armies together instead of letting one man outrun them. To him, holding Patton back was not a mistake. It was leadership. But the numbers never went away. More than 100,000 German troops escaped. They regrouped. They rearmed. They killed again. Their survival showed up on casualty lists that kept growing. There was no courtroom for this. No place where Patton and Bradley could face each other. History leaves only fragments. A diary, a memo, a line in a book. Patton's anger, Bradley's logic. Eisenhower trying to keep an alliance from cracking. The alliance held. The war was won. But how it was won mattered. Patton was pushed aside. Bradley rose. Montgomery kept his legend. Eisenhower became president. Everyone found a way to live with what they had chosen. The soldiers who died after Falaise did not. They fell in Belgium, in Holland, in Germany, fighting an enemy that should have been broken before it ever reached them. Their families never knew the name of the valley. They only knew the dates on the telegrams. That is the cruelty of decisions made over maps. They sound small and spoken, and enormous when their consequences arrive. The gap did close. The Germans were destroyed. But eventually is a dangerous word in war. It is measured in blood. Patton believed the door should have been slammed shut. Bradley believed holding it open kept the alliance alive. Both had reasons. Only history has the graves. And somewhere between speed and caution, between glory and control, lies the truth of the summer of 1944. The war did not have to go on this way. One order made sure it did.